Hey folks, my name is Jeff, and today I'm going to show you how to manually deploy a Docker container to Google Cloud Run using Artifact Registry. There are roughly 6 different steps we'll have to do to get this to work. The first step is to create a repository in Artifact Registry where we can push our image. Second, we need to build the image. Third, we need to authorize Docker with Artifact Registry. Fourth, we need to tag the image. Fifth, we need to push the image. And then finally, we need to actually deploy it to Cloud Run. Let's do step 1 and go create the repository in Artifact Registry. Here I have a brand new project in Google Cloud, and I did a brand new project just so that if I hit any roadblocks with permissions, then maybe it will happen to you as well and you know how to fix it. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go to Artifact Registry, and since this is a brand new project, I need to enable the API, so go ahead and do that if you need to. And now we can create a repository. So a repository in Artifact Registry is just a named bucket where you can store all of your artifacts. So go ahead and click Create Repository, give it a name. The format you want to leave as Docker, assuming that you're pushing a Docker image to it. Mode can stay as standard. And then you need to choose the region. I'm going to leave mine as a single region, and I'm going to choose one close to me, which is going to be US Central 1. And I will leave encryption and cleanup policies as they are, and I will go ahead and click Create. Make sure you follow the naming rules. And once that repository is created, you can go ahead and click in it. There won't be anything in here right now, but I just want to point out that there's a specific path name that goes to where this repository lives. And the path to mine is US Central 1, because that's the region that I chose, and then -docker, because that's the format type, and then .pkg.dev, and then next is the project ID, and then finally the name that you gave your repository. And I want to point that out because we're going to need that later. All right, we finished step 1. Now let's go on to step 2, which is to build the image. And in this video, I'm not going to go into all the details about how to build the image. I'm going to assume that you know how to do that. So I'll just go in and really quickly build my image. So I have my terminal open and I'm in the folder where my Docker file lives. So if I do an ls, you can see here's my Docker file. This is the same Docker file that I used in my last video. So if you want details on what this is and how it works, you can go watch that. And I'll build my image with docker build. I'm going to give it a tag name of demo API because that's the name that I have for my project. And then I'll just use period to use the Docker file in the current folder. And once that's done, if you want to verify it, you can run docker image ls, which will list all of your images. And you can see here is my demo API. Now that we have our Docker image built, we can move on to authentication. You'll need to authenticate Docker so they can talk to the Artifact Registry repository that we just created. And there are a couple different ways that you can do this. The way that I'm going to show you how to do this is using the gcloud CLI. Here's a documentation for that gcloud CLI and how to authenticate Docker. I'll put a link to this in the description if you want to go read through this. But the main steps we need to do is if you don't have the gcloud CLI installed, you need to go install it. And then you need to sign in and authorize yourself. And then you need to authorize Docker so that it can talk to that Artifact Registry repository that we just created. I already have the gcloud CLI installed, so I'm not going to go through that process, but I will go through the initialization step again. And the command for that is gcloud init. And I'm going to say reinitialize this configuration. I'm going to choose my account. And then I'm going to pick the project, which is that manual Cloud Run artifact that I was in earlier, where we set up the repository. So now that I've rerun that initialization process, I've authenticated myself, and I've also picked the project that I'm going to use. And that should be all that I have to do. However, I do want to point out in the documentation that it points out that you have to give special privileges to Docker if you are on Linux or Windows. And I'm running this on a Mac, so I don't have to do this. But if you are using Windows or Linux, there are commands in here that you're going to need to come in here and run yourself. Now we need to authenticate Docker with Artifact Registry. The way that I'm going to do it is by using user authentication. There are other options for doing it using a service account. So if you want to use a service account, go check the documentation. But if you want to use user authentication like me, run gcloud auth login. This is going to give you this long URL that you need to go and authenticate with. So go to that link and follow the authentication process to get logged in. And after you sign in, it's going to ask you to allow your account to have special permissions on your Google Cloud account to do a whole bunch of various things. Go ahead and just say allow. And then you should get this window saying you're authenticated. I'm going to close that. The next thing we need to do is we need to authorize Docker to Artifact Registry using the gcloud CLI. And we do that by giving Docker access to one of the hosts in Artifact Registry. And the command for that is gcloud auth configure-docker. And then you're going to give it a list of host names that you want to authorize Docker to. And this is why I pointed out the path to the repository a little bit earlier. So if I go back into my Artifact Registry repository, this is the host name, uscentral1-docker.package.dev. So if you chose a different region, yours might be a different name, but this is the host name that we're going to pass in. So I will add us-central1 -docker.package.dev, and then hit enter. And then that will print out your configuration file. And this configuration file is basically just a list of all the different host names that you have access to. And now we're set up to talk to Artifact Registry. I do want to point out that all these steps we have to do for this is a one-time thing. If you create a new repository in the same region, you won't have to do this again. And now we can move on to step 4, which is tagging our image. And the way that tagging an image works is you take an image that you already have and you tag it with a new name. And in this case, that tag name is going to be the path to where our Artifact Registry repository is. So in our terminal, we can say docker tag. The next parameter is our image name that we have on our local computer. In my case, it was demo API. And then we're going to give it the tag name. And this tag name, like I said, is the long path of where our Artifact Registry repo is. And the easiest way to get that is to go into Artifact Registry. And when you're inside your repository, you can just copy the path right here. So I've copied that. I will paste that in here. And that path is Artifact Registry hostname, and then your project ID, and then your repository name. And the last part of that tag name is the image name. And in my case, I'm going to use the same demo API name that I use for my local image. So I'll add /demo API. And then optionally, you can add a tag if you want. So for example, I could say this was test or prod. I'm just going to leave mine as empty, which will just give it the latest tag in Artifact Registry, and then go ahead and run that. So that has now tagged our image. And now if you list out your images, you'll see that there's another entry in here. This tag name is for the same image as demo API. Now that our image is tagged, we can move on to step 5, which is pushing our image to Artifact Registry. And this step is super easy, assuming we've done everything else before this correctly. It is docker push, and then it's going to be the whole tag name. So I'm just going to copy the one from above, paste that in here, and run that. And assuming that all of your permissions worked and everything is set up correctly, you should get a message like this that says it's pushed. And if you go into your repository in Artifact Registry, and if you refresh the page, you'll see now there is an image in here. So I have demo API, I can go click on it, and here are the details about that specific image. Now we can move on to the last step, which is actually deploying this in Cloud Run. So I will switch over to Cloud Run, and inside of Cloud Run, I will just say create service. You can see mine is just going to automatically enable the Cloud Run API, because this is the first time that I've used it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to deploy a revision from an existing container image. So if you click select here, it is going to load up all of the Artifact registries in this project, which it will automatically have access to. By default, a service account that runs for Cloud Run will automatically have access to your Artifact Registry repositories. And if I expand this node here, you'll see here's my demo API, and there's that revision that we just deployed. So I will select that, and then everything from here on out is the same as how you would deploy any other time. So I'm going to leave my service name as demo API, and I'm going to leave all of these as defaults, and I'll say allow unauthenticated invocations, and then create. And now this is going to deploy a new Cloud Run revision from that Docker image. And my deployment actually failed. This is one thing I always forget, which I should have mentioned earlier. Since I'm running this on a Mac with an ARM chip, when I built the Docker image, it built it assuming that it was going to be run on a computer with an ARM chip on it, which in this case isn't true. Everything in Google does not run on an ARM chip. And so this next little bit right here is only for people who are running like an M series, like M1, M2, M3 Mac. And the way that you fix this is when you build your Docker image, you need to tell it which platform to compile it for. And I'll put a link in the description down below for the documentation from Docker on how to do these builds. But what you want to do is use docker build x build -- platform, and then a space, and then the name of the platform you want to compile for. In our case, we want to do Linux AMD 64. I'll give it the same tag name I had before, and then I'll run that. And now you've built that Docker image for that specific platform. So if I ran that image as a container on my M1 Mac, it wouldn't actually work, but when I deploy this to Google Cloud, it will work. And if you go into Docker Desktop, you'll see there's actually a different platform next to that demo API image. So now I'll go in and I'll retag this, I'll repush it, and I'll redeploy this. Here's me retagging it, and now I will push that. So now I'll go back into Cloud Run, and I'm going to say edit and deploy a new revision. I'm going to select that new image. So I'll select the one that was just deployed just now. I'll select that. Everything else stays the same, and deploy. And now that container has deployed and it is now working correctly. So if I go to that URL and if I go to /swagger, it is now working. And I have one more bonus tip for .NET developers. If you try to run that build for a specific platform with a quote-unquote normal Docker file, it's not going to work because the .NET restore is just going to get hung up and it's just going to sit there and spin forever. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to go into your Docker file, and in the stage in your Docker file where you do your build, in that line where you choose the image, in this case I'm using the SDK for version 7, you want to add --platform equals $build platform. I don't know why .NET requires this. I found a couple blog posts from people at Microsoft talking about it. I'll put some links down below. But if you have this problem, here's how you fix it. All right, I hope this was helpful for you guys. I did leave in the issue I had with the build platform. Usually when I make these videos, if I have issues like that, I generally leave them in the video for this exact reason. And hopefully if someone's watching this and they have that issue, this will help them out as well. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments down below. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.